Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show. News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Thank you for tuning in today. It's been all about the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll change gears maybe just a little bit with our next guest, editor of quorumreport.com. It's Scott Braddock. Scott, good morning. How you doing today?
Doing well. We've got some much-needed rain from Tropical Storm Beta.
Well, you are lucky.
It's coming into Austin right now. It's cool outside. I'm sitting out with a cigar right now, talking to you in Lubbock.
See, now that's just bragging. That's all that is.
Hey, I'm enjoying. During the summer, if you wanted to have a morning cigar, you better do it before 8 o'clock.
Yeah, you got to be up at like 4 in the morning to get that in.
People don't understand the plight of us cigar smokers.
Absolutely.
So at least I'm in good company.
Absolutely. Let's see. I guess we'll start off, Scott. I said we would, change up a little bit, but we'll get into, at least what our lawmakers are saying about the Supreme Court vacancy. If you didn't think it could get any crazier with 43 days left, it got crazier over the weekend.
It sure did. The news of the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course, is just a shockwave across the entire political landscape, the legal landscape as well. And, you start to see the reactions. And I do want to say at the outset here, one of the things that struck me was the real respect with which President Trump and Senate Republicans and others talked about her as a jurist, as a person, about respecting the way she approached her job. This is such a throwback, Chad, right? This is not the way people operate now, although I would say that there's a lot of these sort of similar relationships in the Texas legislature and Texas government, although it's becoming sort of a fewer and farther in between kind of thing where, people were talking about Justice Ginsburg and, also the late Justice Scalia, who, of course, had a long time, great friendship, even though they didn't agree about almost anything when it came to the law and politics. That didn't matter. They really respected each other. And, I would say that one of the good things about the weekend was sort of thinking about that and hoping that people can kind of do that. But immediately, of course, that's set aside, and it's time to do the next thing. I was thinking about in 2013 when I was on the floor of the Texas Senate, and the Republican majority was getting ready to push through the big omnibus bill on abortion restrictions. And what happened at the time, that's when Wendy Davis was filibustering that. It was bitterly partisan, and you see that the people who were sent to the Capitol to do something by their voters, they're going to do that thing. And so the Democrats at that time, their microphones would not even work because the lieutenant governor had their microphones shut off. Because they were not recognized to talk. They were shutting down that filibuster, and they were passing that abortion bill. Of course, it didn't work the first time around, but they eventually got it done, as you remember back at that time. And you're going to see a similar thing happen in Washington, it looks like. That's the way it's queuing up right now, where the voters, Republican voters, and I think this is fair, Chad, I wonder what you think, the voters sent President Trump to do this, right? I mean, there were a lot of Republicans, and you talked to them at the time in 2015 and 2016, who were very hesitant to support President Trump. But one of the things that he got a lot of base Republican voters on board with was the promise and the follow-through in putting conservative judges on the federal courts, conservative justices on the Supreme Court. And so as Senator Cruz over the weekend argued on some of the Sunday shows, he said, look, this is why President Trump was sent, to do this, to cement conservative control of the Supreme Court and the federal bench at large. And so the mourning period in politics, Chad, it's very quick, and they go on to the business. Because, look, it may be the reality that, look, the Democrats have the wind at their back. I would say that that's fair. If you look at the polling across all of the swing states, if you look at the realities of what's happening on the ground in a lot of these different campaigns, it very well could be that there's a President Biden in January, that there's a Democratic Senate. That's possible. Who knows? We'll see. Not making any predictions here. But if they're going to put another Supreme Court justice on the bench, this is the time to do it. And so there is some debate within the Republican caucus about whether to go ahead and do that before November. I think there are different political realities to that, or whether they would wait until November. The Constitution doesn't say anything about, if President Trump loses to Biden in November, that he somehow loses his ability to, appoint somebody to the Supreme Court. That's not true. I mean, he can do that all the way until his term is over, in January.
So
I think you'll see a bitter fight play out, and I think you'll see both sides charged up in a way maybe we haven't seen just yet.
I think it's interesting that, you bring up what Cruz had said about this is the job that, voters sent Trump to be in.
Yeah.
And earlier, I stressed, listen, not trying to be cold-hearted here, just trying to be real. The death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, let's be completely honest here. Everybody saw that this was going to come at some point. I mean, whenever you reach a certain age, everyone is kind of looking at, okay, is she going to make it through the Trump administration? Is this going to happen? Yep. And I mean, Hillary Clinton, if she would have won, she probably would have been looking at getting 3 Supreme Court nominees. And if you're a Republican, if you're a Trump voter, if you're a Republican voter, this is absolutely why you voted for Donald Trump. And
for a lot of them, yeah.
And I think for those who are, hey, he wasn't my first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth choice, but I voted because of the Supreme Court. This is it. And I think that argument of, you were sent here to do this job, this one job, and who cares about what your reelect looks like? I think that's going to ring true for a lot of people.
I think it is, and we should say, again, there were a lot of Republicans who were very hesitant to support Trump because in no way is he what folks would consider a traditional conservative, right? And so you had a lot of Republicans, sort of coming home to the Republican Party based on what they said were good results. They liked the tax cut bill, and they liked the fact that so many conservative judges were being appointed. Now, the other thing that we should say here, in fairness to the Democrats, is that the Republicans were the ones who set the precedent when President Obama was in office of saying we are not going to confirm a Supreme Court justice in an election year. I have heard Senator Cruz and others talk about the idea that the reason for that at the time was that the White House was controlled by a Democrat and the Republicans controlled the Senate, and then voters chose to not only return a Republican Senate to Washington, but also expanded the majority of Republicans. And so Cruz's argument and others has been, look, it's not just that it was an election year, it's that there are 2 branches of government that make this decision, and that there's a check on what happens. If you have a Republican in the White House and there's a Democratic Senate, they might just say no if it's an election year, and if you flip the parties, they might say no. To get past all of that, Chad, let's just say this. The folks who are involved in this are going to do what they think furthers their ideals and furthers the will of their voters. And the way to deal with that is, if people don't like it, is to vote those people out and then hope for some other outcome in the future. This is something I've said to people over and over again when they're not happy about things that come out of the Texas legislature. This is where I live and where I work down in the weeds, in the legislative process. The fact is that voters do have expectations of these people when they send them to Austin, and I think for the most part they do what voters expect. And then if people don't like that, they can vote them out. And as you've seen over the past few cycles, Texans have been sending more Democrats to Austin, so we'll see if that continues.
We've got a special election that's going on here in Texas, even before Election Day, and that is the race between Drew Springer. You've got Shelley Luther, and I think 4 or 5 other people who are running in that race. What's the latest there?
Well, there was a couple of things, big developments. One, Shelley Luther, the rebel salon owner from Dallas who defied Governor Abbott and continues to make her campaign largely about defiance of Abbott, she was confronted by Senator Pat Fallon, who's no liberal. I don't think anybody would say that. And Luther was calling him the establishment, basically, during a confrontation over in Grayson County, over in the Sherman area. That district, of course, is huge. It goes from Wichita Falls to Grayson County down to Gatesville, Stephenville area. And Representative Springer, who you mentioned, has been essentially sidelined. We first reported a quorum report over the weekend. He told us that his wife had tested positive for COVID-19 1 week ago, last Monday. And so in the meantime, there was some question about whether he should be out campaigning at various events. In a lot of ways, Chad, the Republicans have been just going on and doing events, whether there's a pandemic or not, and that's been true in this race. And some folks asked whether Springer was maybe being irresponsible by being at some campaign events after he learned of the diagnosis of his wife. He says, look, I was socially distanced from people. There's no way anybody could have gotten anything from me. He told one news outlet that he did not get tested for COVID-19 at the request of his doctor. He said that maybe he would get tested after a 14-day quarantine, but regardless, he's locked up at home right now. He and his wife quarantined through the end of this election. 14-day quarantine would run past Election Day, which is next Tuesday. We're just about a week out from that. Early voting was going on last week. Of course, we saw very anemic turnout there, not many people turning out for a September election, which doesn't surprise me at all. It's sort of a surprise to voters to even learn that there is an election in September. I know that some of the candidates have been saying to voters, please, support me in this election, and the voters will say, yeah, I'm voting for you in November. And the candidate will say, no, it's not in November. It's on September 29th, next Tuesday. There was this event in Grayson County at a Mexican restaurant there where Shelley Luther was basically getting in Fallon's face and saying that, she has stood up for Republican values. He was saying that, and people can see the whole video on my Twitter feed, he was saying, so what are you saying here is that I have to go to jail like you did to be a conservative? Is that what your standard is? I mean, it was sort of an ugly back and forth. There's a lot to unpack there. But it is interesting that those who are supporting Luther are now basically saying that people like Pat Fallon, who is sort of known as a Tea Party-style lawmaker, that he's now the establishment, Chad. So that's all sort of upside down. I often say to folks, you can only be in office for so long until you are effectively the establishment. And there's new people coming after you with torches and pitchforks, and that seems to be what's happening in this race. People have asked, does this salon owner who went against Governor Abbott so hard and continues to be a big critic of the governor, does she really have a shot in this very Republican district? And my answer would be absolutely. I'm not going to make any predictions, but I would say that if there is a runoff in this race, and there are 6 candidates, as you mentioned, hard to see how there's not a runoff. I would imagine that she would be in that runoff, and then the question would be who would be up against her. Look, Drew Springer is somebody who's well known throughout the area. He has, been campaigning for about a year for this seat, so give him his due. But he's sort of hobbled here at the end now because of this, this quarantine that he's voluntarily doing.
Yeah. Is there any? And I think I asked you about this last time we talked about this race. Is there any buzz? Is there anything being said about this race behind the scenes about who may be leading? Are there leaked polls out there? Is there anything going on? Because it's just every now and then some news story will pop up about this, but otherwise it seems like all is pretty silent on this race.
Yeah, the big splash was when Luther got into the race. People were asking the question, is this a real thing? That this person who kind of comes out of nowhere, has never held elective office, apparently has never even voted in a Republican primary before, is now saying that she's the proven conservative fighter based on her fight against the governor, essentially. That was the big news right out of the gate about this. And then the other big news was that the election would be sped up. Instead of what would usually happen in a race like this, Chad, that usually there'd be a special election after the person left office, or that they had made it clear that they were leaving office. In this case, Senator Fallon resigned effective in January. So Governor Abbott read that to mean that he could go on and call a special election here. I think that the governor has chosen a route on this that kind of it accomplishes what you just said, which is it kind of keeps it under the radar while a whole bunch of other things are going on. And not to be sort of dismissive of it, dismissive of whoever wins, but I think whoever does win this seat, it'll kind of happen in a way that they kind of sneak in there.
Yeah. Before we let you go, obviously we've got a session that's going to be coming up. We still have a pandemic that's going on as well. If it's still around when the session begins, are we making are lawmakers making any plans, or what's kind of the backup plan? Are we going to be living in a bubble down in Austin?
It could be like the NBA bubble, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, we are told by multiple sources, he didn't make any public statement on this, but there was a conference call, we did confirm that, with the Lieutenant Governor and the chairman in the Texas Senate, in which he told them that, look, we may grind basically to a halt here. There may not be much legislation that's considered. Public input may be very limited. They may have, almost nobody in the Capitol, none of the sort of big, lobby days where different groups come in and, talk to their representatives and things like that. It may be where if you want to talk to a senator or a representative that you might have to set up an appointment or just do it virtually. There were some folks who immediately, and I didn't say this, there were some people who immediately jumped on the Lieutenant Governor and said, wait, weren't you the guy who earlier in the year had said on Fox News Channel that there are certain folks who should be just willing to, to jump on the grenade here for the economy and sort of sacrifice yourself in the middle of a pandemic so that business could be open, and he's talking actively behind the scenes, apparently, about having government be largely closed off to the public. Some people saw that as hypocritical, but the reality is that these folks are talking about how they're going to handle their legislative business during a pandemic when you do have lawmakers who are in the vulnerable populations. And, as one person put it, you may have a Texas House floor that is a hot spot, and what would happen if lawmakers, just like Drew Springer, what if all of them had to do a 14-day quarantine? As one person said it to me, one senior lawmaker said, unlike the NBA or Major League Baseball, the legislature's only one team. There's nobody else to play if they have to do a 14-day quarantine.
All right, that'll be something to watch for. Scott, tell folks what's happening over at quorumreport.com.
We've heard about all these polls, Chad, in Texas House races. Dave Carney, the chief strategist for the governor, also convened one of these private Zoom calls, or he was on a private Zoom call for lawmakers and lobbyists last week. We're reporting out the details of that this afternoon at quorumreport.com. So very interesting insider stuff for you at quorumreport.com. You can click on subscriptions there on the homepage. We'll get you signed up.
All right, sounds good. Scott, as always, appreciate your time.
Thanks, my friend. Talk soon.
All right, talk to you later. That's Scott Braddock, editor of quorumreport.com.